Welcome back, or welcome for the first time, to another dissection of some of my favorite drummers, some of my favorite gear, things like this. This morning I'm on a particular tangent, thinking of some of my favorite drummers and just influences I've had over the years, and thinking about my trajectory as a musician, and where things led, when I discovered things, blah 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 blah. The point of today's video is to give a little love to he's not an unknown drummer, but he's definitely plays a fringe kind of style of music that maybe not a lot of people are possibly super aware of. I know in Europe, where this band is from, that they're basically kind of the Metallica of their music scene or whatever, and they're very highly accoladed and things like that. But just give you a bit of history with my discovery of the band and early kind of adoption of their material and becoming a fan. When I was a kid, coming across music wasn't quite easy. It was mostly exposure, and most of the bands that I had known about were either word of mouth from an older sibling, perhaps my friend's group. We did watch my family had cable television, and we did watch music television and music videos, and so I was aware of the bigger bands of the time. And if we're talking about my particular genre I enjoyed a lot was rock music and heavy metal. So I gravitated towards bands, Metallica and Megadeth, Skid Row, Def Leppard, kind of the more household name brands of rock at that time. And that stuff was all great as a 10, 11, 12 years old, however old I was. But also at the same time, I think at that age as a musician, if you have a keen interest in music like I did, then you kind of start trying to look outside the wheelhouse a little bit and try to find your own kind of bands that you can have. You can keep them in your back pocket. They're your secret, and you can be the one that tells your friends about this band that they hadn't heard of. And so what I had started doing at that time was back in the late 1900s. Feels weird to say that, but it's accurate. The late 1900s, I started getting music magazines, and it would be mostly the hard rock, like Hit Parader, Kerrang. There was a handful of others too, which Metal Edge. They're all probably long out of print since then. A little bit later on was Revolver magazine. There was a lot of music-based media back then, and especially there was a pretty kind of select focus on heavy metal, and that was where I had set my targets to. And so I started getting some of these magazines, and surprisingly, I grew up in not a music mecca by any means, but I was able to access some of these magazines, and through the magazines I was able to read about the bands I really liked, but also to see the CD covers and artwork and little interviews with bands I'd clearly never heard of before. And I discovered it kind of goes this way everywhere. It's like if I'm Canadian, and so European bands were intriguing for me, and I think the same it's kind of the same in Europe. I've spoken with some people in Europe, and it was interesting that they kind of thought the same thing about Canadian acts. There would always be this interest across the ocean. about what's going on musically in other places. America had its obsession with England in the 60s, and, Rolling Stones and the Beatles and all, Led Zeppelin, all this stuff. And so looking at these European bands, and I'd be like, I couldn't pronounce half the names. The members all had, very strange, a lot of umlauts over the vowels and stuff like that. And but I was fascinated by it because the way that these guys spoke about music sometimes was very, at that period we're basically kind of into the at the end of glam rock 80s and into the 90s, and there's very much this kind of narrow, narrow facet, or this narrow kind of alignment with bands where you don't step outside these certain things if you don't want to, whatever. It's all about acceptance and kind of, appearance and things like that. And a lot of the European bands had kind of, eschewed that a little bit, and they weren't so much concerned about it. And I remember hearing, couldn't tell you where, it must have been a reference that perhaps like a band like Entombed or something like that. I had heard about these subgenres, Napalm Death, death metal, and like this very kind of obscure category of metal where the lyrics were, brutal and, controversial subject matter and things like that. Cannibal Corpse being a fairly well-recognized American version of that. And so this is all around 1994, something along those lines. And movies, 1994 is the year Ace Ventura: Pet Detective comes out. And I'm sure I'm not alone in the kind of discovery of Cannibal Corpse through that movie. There's a famous scene where Ace Ventura goes through, a death metal bar, and Florida's death metal scene was quite prominent at that time. And it was kind of like, wow, there's like this much more brutal subgenre of heavy metal. Double bass, blast beats. I'd never kind of heard anything at that point. So seeing that movie, seeing that scene in that movie in particular, really piqued my interest in finding some of these bands. Getting back to the magazines, I'm scouring through these magazines, looking up anything and everything I can. And one of the bands I come across, probably in 1995, I want to say, the logo is kind of what really piqued my interest at first. It was a little, salacious, or, kind of controversial, and, it had a devil's tail or something like that. Anyways, the band being Satyricon. And back then, it was very hard to procure CDs easily. And there was a record shop in my hometown where you could order CDs, but some of these things just weren't available. And I want to say it was 94 or 95, Satyricon had released probably their first album called The Shadow Throne. And I wanted to get that CD and have it. I was just intrigued by it. It seemed, they had the makeup and the look, and it was still like the corpse paint era for the band and stuff. And it was very all intriguing to me, kind of like the same intrigue that Kiss, with the makeup had, and just all these kinds of things. Being a young kid, it was very, it just elicited a lot of feelings, and it was dangerous. It felt dangerous, which was kind of cool. And so taking all my hard-earned money that I had made from whatever random jobs I had, importing CDs from Europe back then was quite the expensive adventure for a young person. And if you want to do the math to find out the cost, comparative today, in 1995, I think I paid $58 to import The Shadow Throne from Satyricon to my little record shop. And that was pretty much all the money I think I had made that summer, or whatever my little job was. And so the excitement to get that album and the wait and all the anticipation of getting it, and I hadn't heard it. I literally bought it, not ever having heard anything of the band. I just bought it and took a chance on it, and to say like it was kind of mind blowing was something else. Honestly, at first I was a little disappointed, coming from hearing all these hugely produced albums, and like just the way music was made back then, overproduced, big sounds, arena rock, all this stuff. The more I investigated black metal and these subgenres, the more I realized these guys are, that's the antithesis of what they're trying to do. There's like, famous kind of like things talking about like Mayhem and like some of the other like Norwegian bands where they literally like the worse the recording is, the better it suits the aesthetic of the whole genre. It's black metal was the antithesis of major label music essentially at the time, and had this real kind of like a punk rock thing to it as well. And so that was very appealing to me in that sense. And these guys were just like, I think the early kind of guys in that genre were definitely living that lifestyle. And, just whatever that means, it's just like they were all in sort of thing. If you've seen the movie Lords of Chaos, which is all about kind of Mayhem, the band Mayhem, and their early kind of lifestyle and things like that. I think there was just a lot of that going on. But Satyricon, to me, there was something kind of different about it, and there was a different kind of musicality to it. And even though the first record, it doesn't sound great, and I was a little disappointed just because it was different than what I expected. But because I spent so much money on it, I decided to keep going and give it a few more, and eventually it ends up becoming just like part of this repertoire that I have of music I pull from. And the band kind of goes on, and CD is still expensive to import, so I try to keep up as much as I can with the band. The Volcano record and like a handful of other ones. And those are all still kind of like on obscure labels and very, very hard to find. And then I don't remember the exact year, and I can't remember the exact lineage. I should have probably researched this a bit more, but this is very off the cuff thinking. And Fuel for Hatred is kind of the song where they have a music video, and the song is accessible enough. It's like the Enter Sandman of black metal, if you want to call it something like that. It's a very catchy chorus. It has all the hallmarks of what Satyricon always kind of, put out there. The very gritty kind of vocals. Frost is their drummer, and huge influence of mine. Huge influence. It might not be, kind of noticeable in some of the original projects or some of the things I'm doing, but if you look through my YouTube channel, you will definitely see that I have covered a lot of Satyricon songs over the years. And the reason is Frost is one of my drumming heroes. He has this thing about him, there's been better drummers that have come along. I mean, Nick Barker in the early Cradle of Filth and Duma Borgir days. Obviously, post that, Behemoth's drummer, what's his name? Inferno. These guys all have nicknames. I never remember the nicknames. Behemoth's drummer. I mean, you start getting into like George Callias and Nile, and these guys are just technicians beyond anything that had been kind of put down before. But Frost had this kind of a not sloppy, but it just had this very loose feel, whereas everyone else, everything felt kind of rigid, and Frost had this other thing going on in Satyricon, and I always found it really appealing. And I don't think if he was replaced in the band, you would ever get the same feel to the songs. The relationship that him and the lead singer Satyr have, it has to be something akin to like a one of those Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich kind of relationships where they're just the relationship is the band, and you don't have one without the other kind of thing. And Frost was a huge inspiration for drumming for me, and learning about double bass and trying to get better at double bass. Fuel for Hatred was kind of the genre breaker song. It was being featured on Fuse, and it was being featured in these more mainstream things. You could read about Satyricon in some of the more mainstream magazines at that point. And it was interesting to see some of my favorite bands at that point. System of a Down had put out their first album in 1997 or 1998. And Darren Malakian, who's another big musical hero of mine, he openly talked about Satyricon and his love for them. And another musician, Joey Jordison, who's a huge influence of mine, talked about Satyricon. So kind of reiterated, that there was these guys that were kind of, fringe musicians themselves, and then they had this love for this kind of even more fringier band from Norway. And so, we get into kind of, at that point, I think Darren Malakian had his own record label called Eat Your Music. And after System of a Down's success, he felt like, I don't know, perhaps I'd read, he felt like, bringing up the bands that would never get kind of the major label exposure and giving them kind of their just due. And so then we get into where Satyricon is releasing on major labels, and we have Now Diabolical comes out, a handful of records that are these kind of it ends up kind of getting away from the traditional black metal in some sense with the blast beats, and they kind of Satyricon really starts embracing this slower, in some of the songs they embrace this slower kind of meandering, just the songs are very long, but just catchy stuff. Songs like The Wolf Pack or Black Crow on a Tombstone, To the Mountains. There's these incredible songs and this incredible musicianship. And if you aren't familiar with Satyricon, my favorite release from them, and the one I kind of tend to listen to the most, it's almost a greatest hits collection. They did a live show that featured the Norwegian choral opera, whatever it is. It's a bunch of singers, a chorus of singers. Whatever that's called. It's not an orchestra, there's no other instruments, it's just the band and all these singers, but they just add all these gothic kind of elements to the arrangements of the songs, and they literally, as a fan of Satyricon, they kind of play every song you'd want to hear them play. It's just it's unbelievable. One of their famous songs is a song called Mother North. And, that's kind of, fans are divided. There's kind of the old era of Satyricon and the newer era, and Mother North is one of the early songs I think that the early fans really kind of embrace and love a lot. And there's an amazing version of Mother North that they play on this, Satyricon live with the opera or whatever it is, live at the opera, something like that. Unbelievable concert, and you really get to see kind of the band in full force, and the musicality comes out, and you really feel a lot of the emotion that's in that. A lot of people wouldn't necessarily kind of attach emotion to black metal, except the dark, cold, all the negative connotations that go along with that whole subgenre. But Satyricon, love them or hate them, they kind of, are the bridge between commercial acceptance of black metal and the old, anti-establishment sort of stuff. They've never, in my opinion, kind of got their due credit they do kind of get derided a little bit from some of the more, serious black metal fans. Like, like they're not true Norwegian black metal, even though it's like kind of like, name me another band that's on the cusp of starting that genre. There's definitely earlier bands that have come out, but Satyricon's been there, the entire time, and been spearheads to that. And if it wasn't for a band like Satyricon being slightly more accessible, I don't know if you get exposure in the same way. Luckily, also at that time, Bam Margera and the CKY videos kind of brought Dimmu Borgir a lot more exposure, and people forget like that at that time that stuff was hard to find, and guys like Bam and a few other people were really, Darren Malakian, Joey, were really pushing these very well hidden artists a lot more to the forefront, and making it easier for a person like myself to find these things, which is a very beautiful thing, and forever owe a debt to those guys for wearing their influences on their sleeves, and being able to have a little bit of influence in for those guys playing. It would have been amazing. I'm almost positive at one point that Joey Jordison from Slipknot filled in for Frost from Satyricon. Frost couldn't play for some reason, and that would have been amazing tour to see. Joey was very lucky where he filled in for quite a few of his kind of favorite bands, and but yeah, Frost from Satyricon, huge influence for me. He brings this musicality to the drumming, and he's very, that guy's an artist through and through. And I think the way that he kind of approaches the drums is from much more of a painting pictures with drums versus just keeping the beat. Like, he does some crazy, just unconventional things. There are parts you would just never think to incorporate into a song. And, I've kind of like adopted that too, where, it's kind of like the punk rock, like, let's do the opposite of what people are expecting here. And, you have a pop song and you throw like a double bass triplet kind of loop or something like that into it. I'm definitely guilty of doing those kinds of things, but these are the things that kind of make, music unique. And, it doesn't have to be to everyone's liking. At the end of the day, if it pleases you, then that's the point of making this stuff. And but yeah, Satyricon, massively influential band in my life. If I was going to suggest an album to listen to, let me look up their discography. There's some stuff that's missing from online. I don't know if it's because of rights issues, digital management, whatever. Now Diabolical, the self-titled album they released in 2013 is more kind of a rock and roll record. It might be a bit more accessible. A song like Necrohaven or something like that. It's a rock and roll song with some grittier lyrics. Age of Nero, amazing album. Live at the Opera, I've mentioned. Some of the earlier stuff. There's the Shadow Throne, which is the first album I was exposed to. Much more extreme and much more in the black metal realm. And then Volcano, which is kind of like their, late 90s, like getting into the early accessible side of Satyricon. So there's a lot to explore with them. They've had a long career, and there's many kind of different eras of the band, but there's a lot to choose from. I don't have many band shirts now, but Satyricon is one of the few bands that I proudly wear their band shirt. No one knows who they are, but the odd time I'm walking around and I get that odd head nod from a certain guy. He's probably got a leather coat on and a beard, but there's the that odd time I get the acknowledgement, and that's cool. I like that we still, in today's day and age, have an opportunity to kind of have, you keep these bands and there's only a select few people. It's, you know, these little groups and our little tribes of fans and stuff like that. And so it's cool to have that. And yeah, Satyricon, if you haven't checked them out, I encourage you to do so. You might be shocked, but you also might be surprised. This has been the one about Satyricon. Cheers.